Hi, and welcome to Your Money, Your Taxes, and Your Wealth. My name is Jarod Bloom, and I'll be your host. Today we're going to talk about college planning, and specifically about student loan debt with college planning. My guest today is Julie Shields-Rutyna from Mifa, Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority. Julie, thanks for coming on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So let's just start with, what is Mifa?
Oh, yes. So Mifa is the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority, and we've been around in Massachusetts since 1982. And we really exist to help make higher education more affordable and accessible to all Massachusetts families.
Okay, so is Mifa a government agency? Is it quasi-government? There's sort of public and private to it. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yes. So we call ourselves a quasi-public agency. So we were started by the state, actually, at the request of many colleges and universities in the state at that time. But other than that, we operate as a private entity.
Okay, interesting.
Without public funds, yes.
Okay, and so who is Mifa serving?
Yes, so we serve all of the families in Massachusetts, and as well as we're partnered with colleges, high schools, and other organizations who are interested in helping students get to college and parents support their children in getting to college. So we have a wide network.
Okay, and I've looked at your website and I've been to a lecture that you've given at the high school. So I know that Mifa is working with both giving resources to students and their families, just about the college process, about the financing process. So it's giving resources, but then it's also offering financing and offering loans as well.
Yes, so I'd say we have some programs, such as we have two college savings programs, the U Fund and the U Plan. And then we have private loans for families that find that they need to finance some part of the college education. But then the other piece really is that we just have all kinds of free resources for families. So my role at Mifa is really to provide guidance to families with students of any age and at any stage in the college process, all the way from someone with a young child who wants to think about how to save and plan, to children in middle school and early high school about, how to choose courses and educate themselves about careers and all of that, and then right up through high school when we help educate families about the admissions process and about financial aid and applying for financial aid.
Okay, and you mentioned the U Fund and the U Plan, which
Yes.
they're similar sounding, but they're a little bit different. Now they're both 529 plans. That's 529, Section 529 in the IRS code, but they're a little bit different. Can you talk a little bit about the differences between the two?
Yes. So the U Fund is actually the Massachusetts 529 plan, which is a way that families can save with tax benefits. And so it's a good option. I'm sure you talk with your families about all of those savings options. The U Plan is a prepaid tuition program and has some very specific ways of operating here in Massachusetts, where there are 80 colleges who are part of that program, and families can, in a sense, lock in current day tuition and fees and be locked in for when their students go to college 5 or 10 or 15 years later.
Okay.
And our Mifa website has a nice little video that describes the details of that prepaid tuition plan.
So similar sounding name, but
Right.
just a little bit different.
Yes.
So for people who are watching, or just to be aware that there are differences there, and you can get more information on the Mifa website.
Yes.
So I wanted to talk, because I actually started saying that we were going to talk about college planning and student loan debt. I maybe should have said, instead of college planning, higher education planning, because maybe not everybody should go to college or can go to college. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about that as well. So when we're talking with our clients about their higher education planning for their children, generally it's about college, and everybody feels that they want to go to college, or they want their children to go to college, and that's part of the American dream. But I think it's important to maybe take a step back and say, okay, yes, going to college is important, but we really need to take into account the financial considerations here. I teach a class in the community ed program here, and that's actually the thesis of my program, which is financial considerations should be the primary consideration in whatever decisions that you're going to make for this higher education.
Yes.
What perspective does Mifa take on that?
Yes, so yeah, we try to educate families to make good financial decisions. So really, we strongly believe that if a family does three things, and I'll say those three things. One, be aware, which I think fits into what you're saying, of all of the options and choices out there for whether it be college or a career path for their children. Really educate themselves about all of the options. That's a really good step. Second, to really educate themselves on financial aid that's available and how to apply for that and how to receive that and where that fits in as an option. And then thirdly, we do say, if college is going to be in the mix, which many times it is for parents with children, then to recognize the importance of saving something toward college costs or higher education costs. And if families can do those three things, I think they're in a much better position when their student is a junior or senior in high school to not be reliant on borrowing necessarily, or not solely reliant on borrowing to finance higher education. You know, doing all of that work well in advance, as early as possible, really, to think about all of that and continue to stay updated, connected on everything that's out there.
Yep. So obviously the cost of college has gone up tremendously. I think everybody is aware of that. And you know, I work with a lot of clients, and they range on the income spectrum. Some are lower income, some are higher income. And when you have the cost of college at a 4-year private school costing about $60,000 a year between tuition and room and board, you know, some of my clients, they can afford that. Other clients can't, and that just goes, you know, for the general population. So when we're talking about this, or when I'm talking about this with clients, if somebody can afford that much and it's just not going to, you know, significantly impact their financial situation, I think that's fine. But what I really want to get across is, for somebody where you're in a situation where the cost of going to school is going to be prohibitive, or it's going to require you to borrow money, or borrow a lot of money, you know, we really need to stop and think about this here. And thank you for coming on the show, because I really wanted to talk about that, and that's one of the things I talk about in my class. And you know, I feel like there's this mindset of you absolutely have to go to college, and you know, you go to the best college that you should get into. And of course, I'm really trying to say, I'm not saying college is bad, of course not, but you need to take into account the financial considerations.
So I agree, and it's funny, I think one of the most important pieces of advice I tend to give to families, and I give it to both students and parents because I think both need it, is not to fall in love with one college. Because sometimes students are looking at colleges, they fall in love with one, and then if they get admitted to that college, they're just determined to go there, and the parents are determined to not disappoint their child. And all rationale goes out the window. And as you say, they're not thinking about the finances. And so instead, I think the more we as parents can check ourselves and help our students to keep an open mind about all of the options out there. I mean, if we think about it, these are approximate numbers, but 4,000 colleges in the United States, you know, there are over 100 here in Massachusetts. And there are many, many paths to a degree, to a good life, to, to all of the things that you're saying. And I will share one important piece here in Massachusetts, and Mifa actually just published a blog about this recently. And it's the new Commonwealth Commitment and Mass Transfer Program. So these are Massachusetts-specific programs that allow students who get a community college degree, an associate's degree here in Massachusetts, and then go on to get a bachelor's degree at one of the public institutions. It allows them to do that more seamlessly. So keeping a certain grade point average can be automatic admission, and then allows credits to transfer, and actually has pieces in that reduce the costs all the way through, so that a student can join that program and receive an associate's and bachelor's degree here in Massachusetts for much less than some of these numbers we hear out there that are so overwhelming. So it's just kind of knowing all that's available.
See, and that's interesting to me because I think it highlights something, which is that there are different ways of doing this. There are different ways of pursuing your higher education. And again, if somebody has the resources that they can afford a 4-year private school, if that's the right path for a child, then that's great. But if you don't have that capability or those resources, and now you're saying, well, if I'm going to go pursue this path, I'm going to now need to start borrowing money. I think it's really important to understand there are other paths out there. And whether it's a lower cost school or whether it's options that you just mentioned, there are ways of doing this. And actually, I almost wanted to ask you along those lines, should a student even borrow money to go to school? And you know, I personally have some views on that. Every client's situation is different. But does Mifa have a perspective on whether you should borrow at all?
Yeah, so I think that it's a very individual decision, you know, both on the part of the student and the parent. The reality is that if a student wants to go to a very expensive private college, and we know some of those numbers are upward of $60,000 per year, that in many, even with a terrific financial aid package, which can cover more than half of that, or the reality might be that to meet those costs, you know, the family, that student borrowing might need to be a reality. So a student might need to borrow some loans. So the federal loans allow a student to borrow approximately $27,000 over the course of a 4-year undergraduate degree. And that translates into about a $300 payment upon graduation.
Correct.
And so I think what's really important is it might be a necessity if a student chooses to go to a certain school, but I think that we need to help students and the parents to help their students consider all of that. And you know, I know it's almost hard for an 18-year-old to think past 6 months away or a year away, but you really think about, okay, what will my life be like 6 years from now when I graduate from college? Do I want to have all employment options available to me? Do I want to have to understand that I might have to move back with mom and dad if I have a payment that I can't make? So really trying to get the students and the parents to think about what borrowing will mean.
From my perspective, when students have debt, it means that they don't have freedom. So as you pointed out, if they miss a payment, they have to move back home with mom and dad. But you don't have the freedom to then pursue a career that you want to pursue. Whether you might want to work for a nonprofit or pursue a passion that just simply doesn't pay well. But if you have debt and you have these debt payments, well, you now can't pursue those choices because you have the financial reality of making debt payments. In the class that I teach in community ed, I have a slide which shows, so on your average about $300 a month payment for 10 years, if you borrow the average debt load, if you didn't have that payment, that same $300 a month for 10 years ends up being about $600,000 by the time you're age 62. In other words, if you didn't take that to pay your debt, but just took it and invested in the stock market, let's say, on average, it would end up with about $600,000 by the time you're age 62. So, you know, I just think that people aren't thinking about this. They get very emotional, and I understand that. But I really want to show this information to people by this TV program, by the class that we're teaching in community ed, in having meetings with clients. I really want them to understand the implications of this.
And I think that's terrific. And I think that is really what students and families need to be doing, is thinking and learning about this so that they're able to make the best choice. And that example that you just showed might spark something in a student to say, I'm going to make a different choice here. And yet I will say that there are some students who might say, you know, my plan is to get a computer engineering degree. And this four-year private college, or even four-year publics, which are very expensive these days,
Yep.
has a program that I think is going to give me what I need, and may still make that choice, but at least they're factoring in all of the information.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important for families to make informed choices. You know, an 18-year-old, obviously, they have the whole world ahead of them, but they don't have a certain level of maturity that just simply comes with years of experience. And so, you know, can an 18-year-old really make that decision? And yes, some can, absolutely. But I think, you know, we have now about $1.4 trillion in student loan debt, and I think that means that people have been making some bad decisions cumulatively, on average, for a number of years. And so I really encourage people to think about and educate themselves about all of this information.
Exactly. Absolutely.
One of the things you mentioned earlier was about a financial aid package, and I also wanted to clarify some things about that. So when schools give you a financial aid package, and it's based on the FAFSA and some other financial aid processes, so there's loans, there's loans, there's scholarships and grants. So scholarships and grants are, of course, great free money, if you will. But then there's also loans that are part of the financial aid package. And I think what people need to understand and be aware of is that when you talk about financial aid, and I don't mean you, but when we talk about financial aid, loans can be considered part of aid.
Yes.
And on the one hand, I understand that because you know, no bank is going to loan money to an 18-year-old with no collateral and no credit history. So just giving them a loan is a form of aid, but at the same time, it's not a scholarship, it's not a grant. This is something that has to be paid back. So could you talk a little bit about, you know, this concept of debt is actually being considered aid?
Yes. So it is true that, you know, a financial aid package has all of those components. The grants, scholarships, work study, a work component sometimes, and then the federal student loans are considered part of the aid for one of the reasons you mentioned, that, you know, an 18-year-old student is borrowing that loan on their own name with no cosigner, and so no, that is an unusual type of a loan. And the other reason it's considered financial aid is that the federal student loans do have some benefits that you don't see in, I want to say, other type of loans. So one being that it's a low fixed interest rate, and for part of the loan, sometimes if the loan is subsidized, the federal government is paying the interest while the student is in college.
Yep.
So that's another little piece which makes it a different type of loan. And then the last piece is that there are some specific repayment choices for those federal student loans, which give the student a little more freedom to manage their debt and pick a repayment plan that works for them. So the newest, and the one that many students are taking advantage of, is the one that's pay as you earn. It's the repayment amount can be tied to a student's incomes. So what you mentioned before, if a student wants to take a job in a nonprofit organization or do other work that is going to make paying their loan debt difficult, they can choose that type of a repayment plan. Now, of course, we're all better off paying our loans, if we have loans, as quickly as possible to reduce the amount of interest. And some of these plans will extend that interest. But having those choices make those federal student loans a little bit unique. And that's why they are considered part of that financial aid package.
So, and I want to talk a little bit about the difference between federal loans and private loans, and then kind of come back to the repayment options that you mentioned. So, as you point out, there is a difference. There's federal debt, federal student loans, and then there's private student loans, which Mifa is considered a private student loan. And I think, to Mifa's credit, on its website, you have things that say, we really encourage you to go to federal loans first before going to private loans. So federal loans, they have different repayment options, whereas private loans may not have those repayment options. They have generally lower interest rates. They may be fixed, whereas private loans might be fixed or variable. So there is a difference, and I think it's important for people to understand those differences. Then, as you pointed out about repayment options, yes, there are these repayment options that are based on what your income is. The I don't want to say problem, but the consideration that I want to bring up about them is that, number one, that's the way things are today. Who knows what it's going to be in the future, based on politics, based on the results of the current election. Is that going to change these repayment options going forward? Or even if the results of the election went a different way, who knows? But this is all subject to politics. And then secondly, again, this is all, again, subject to politics, but also, so on the tax side of things, being a CPA, when debt gets forgiven, it can be taxable to the student. So I think sometimes people just aren't aware of it, and they see these programs that are out there that say, well, I can reduce my payments and have it be based on my income. That's great. However, there are some real consequences here, and I don't know if people are aware of it, or even if they care, they just say, well, I'll worry about that in the future because, you know, I just need to make my payments now.
No, and you're exactly right. I think that I find, having worked in this field for so long, that people hear sound bites of information, don't have the full understanding, and then maybe don't make the right choices. So I agree with you that I think this goes right along with what we've been saying, that I think up front, students and parents need to understand everything about the choice they're making. And if a student is deciding to take a loan, they need to know everything from interest rates and terms, and you know, if I want to go to graduate school, can I defer this when I go to graduate school, or am I going to have to pay it off first? All kinds of pieces. And I think, again, because the college decision becomes this emotional decision for many families, they don't take the time to pay attention to all of the details. So I agree with you that I think that students need to consider very, very carefully the choices that they're making, and then think them through for the long term, for not just the fall, but for 6, 10 years out. And again, you know, I mentioned graduate school, but again, with an eye toward always leaving your choices and options open, because as soon as you make a decision that closes off an option, that's you know, that's closing off an option.
One of the slides that I show in my presentation is it's a group picture of when I started out. My first job out of college, I worked at Price Waterhouse, big accounting firm in downtown Boston, and I have this picture of our starting group together, and it says, here's all of the schools that we went to. I went to Boston University, and we have somebody from Boston College and Northeastern, University of Pennsylvania, UMass Amherst, UMass Boston, and I list what the tuition is of each school. And I said, you know what? We were all starting out at the same starting salary back in 1995, and today, same thing. If you were to go to work for Price Waterhouse or any of the accounting firms, or you know, any general firm, you're going to be making the same starting salary on average as the rest of your peers in that city. And I really want people to see that and think, yes, it's anecdotal. However, it's not going to matter what school you go to. What is going to matter is how you apply yourself, what you've learned, the connections that you make, the skills that you've learned to get that first job. Once you have that first job, I think it really doesn't matter so much where you went to school. I mean, yes, there's alumni connections and experiences that you have, and all of that is wonderful. But I feel like you can get that at just about any reputable school.
Well, it's true, right? It's all what you put into it and the opportunities you take advantage of. I will mention something, though, which is, because I think this can be a myth, too, that we see these very expensive price tags for certain colleges and universities. But some of the most expensive colleges and universities do have significant and the most financial aid to award at times.
Yes.
So one piece of advice I give to families is, on every college website, there is something called a net price calculator, where a family can go in and put in some information about themselves, both financial information and student academic information, to get an estimate of the type of financial aid award they may receive. Just because in the end, it may be an affordable option, may not, but maybe. And so that is another tool that I like families to think about, so that they know they may have more options than they think.
Yep.
The other piece I will add is with Mifa and families connecting with Mifa, whether it be on our website or on Facebook, or we have this email curriculum, we just try to get information out about some of those tools and all of that, so that families can continually see, oh, I didn't know about net price calculators, let me try this, or let me look into this mass transfer. So we try to keep families up to date and current on everything they can be thinking about to help in that college decision.
And I wouldn't discourage people from applying to schools.
Right.
And I wouldn't be discouraged just by the price tag. As you point out, there really is a net price to it. It's not just the sticker price. So I would encourage people to apply. You don't know what kind of financial aid package you're going to get until you apply. I mean, you can estimate it, but you're not going to know for sure. Some of these schools have large endowments, and they can give very generous financial aid packages. So I would encourage people to apply as well to the schools that they think they're interested in, but to really, again, make financial considerations be the primary consideration. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's about approximately $1.4 trillion of debt outstanding in this country. I mean, it's a real problem. It's larger than basically everything except mortgage debt, all other debts. And where do you see this going in the future? I mean, we can't predict the future, but what are your thoughts about the student loan situation in this country and what's going to happen?
Yes, well, I mean, I think that it is something that has now, it's now in the forefront of people's minds. And I guess it's up to you and me and all of the people who work helping families to keep it in the forefront of people's minds. So I think that the more we can do to help individual families make good decisions, and again, know that I sometimes joke when I'm at a summer barbecue or something, people will say to me, oh, college is too expensive, should we not even go, and to think of it a little bit differently and to think, well, no, I have options open to me, but let me figure out how I can do this in the way that's best for my family. So I think that's good on an individual level, and I think as a more public consideration, I think some things have been put in place to help students be able to manage this enormous amount of debt that is out there, but I think even more needs to be done.
Well, Julie, thank you very much for joining us on the show. And it was very helpful and great to learn about these options and learn more about Mifa. I think it's a terrific resource that we have here in Massachusetts. So thank you very much.
Glad to be here.
So thank you for joining us. We'll be back next time talking about additional topics on your money, your taxes, and your wealth. Thank you.